not the small-wheeled kind that ran on Earth's old streets. Those he remembered fondly from his youth, creaking machines packed with noisy kids, worn-out workers, and the smell of oil and cheap food. No, what Jed Carter hated were the interdimensional buses. Those long, clunky vessels were the only affordable way for most colonists and travelers to move between the scattered worlds of the galaxy. They rattled across the folds of space, bouncing from one-dimensional corridor to another, carrying hundreds of passengers stacked into narrow rows. No privacy, no comfort, and always delays. A trip that should have taken hours often stretched into days with faulty gates, endless inspections, and greedy corporations squeezing every credit from tired travelers. Jed Carter had spent too many years trapped inside those suffocating halls, knees pressed against the seat in front of him, sharing air with strangers who coughed, argued, and snored. At his age, 68 Earth years, though he looked older from grease, sun, and stress, it was more than an inconvenience. It was humiliation. He was a mechanic through and through. His hands bore the stains of a lifetime of fixing engines, pumps, and hulls. Where other men saw scrap, Jed saw puzzles. But the galaxy didn't care about puzzles anymore. It cared about profit. The transport cartel ruled travel, and no amount of grease or know-how could free people from their monopoly. At least, that was what everyone believed, until Jed Carter walked into a forgotten scrapyard auction on the fringe of Orion's Spur. The auction yard was nothing to look at. A flat stretch of hardened soil beneath a weak red sun, with half-buried hulls jutting up like bones from sand. The smell of rust and burned fuel clung to the air. A few dozen buyers milled around, most of them aliens with sharp clothes, sharp tongues, and sharper eyes. They were scavengers, traders, and speculators. Jed shuffled among them, his coveralls stained, his cap pulled low. He had no intention of competing with the wealthy merchants who usually stripped these yards of anything valuable. He had come on a whim, drawn by a rumor of old war stock left behind in the last clearance. Maybe he'd find some engine cores or a few sturdy hull plates for his workshop. An alien auctioneer stood on a raised platform, 4 thin arms waving in different directions as his voice projected through speakers. His words switched between trade common and the clicking tongue of his people. Lots were rolled out on grav lifts, rusted mining drones, broken navigation panels, cracked storage tanks. The crowd barked out bids. Numbers climbed fast for anything remotely useful. Jed stayed silent. Then came Lot 48. A set of 5 hulking shapes were dragged forward, half covered in dust and tangled cables. They looked less like ships and more like carcasses pulled from some forgotten grave. Their hulls were scarred, their fins bent, their paint long gone. One was missing half a wing. Another had collapsed inward at the cockpit. Obsolete relics, the auctioneer cried, his voice cracking. Decommissioned during the Kethan Wars 3 centuries past. Worthless for combat, worthless for commerce. They come as is. Reserve price, 100 credits per hull. The crowd laughed. One alien merchant, a tall insectoid with glittering wings, snorted so loudly his mandibles clattered. You want us to pay for scrap? Those aren't ships. Those are coffins. Another, a scaled trader with jeweled rings, flicked his tail. They're cursed. I wouldn't take them if you paid me. The auctioneer grew desperate. Perhaps someone will bid for salvage. Their frames still hold rare alloys. Their reactors might explode if touched, the insectoid interrupted, earning another wave of laughter. Jed stared at the shapes. Where others saw wreckage, his mechanic's eyes traced the lines of design. The hulls weren't crude. They had a sleekness beneath the rust, a suggestion of speed. He noticed hidden ports along the sides, unusual curves in the plating, faint scorch marks that spoke of battles survived, not lost. Something stirred inside him. 50 credits, he said, raising a hand. The crowd turned. Silence fell for a moment, then erupted into jeers. Human fool! Does he plan to live inside them like a hermit crab? 50 for all 5? They're barely worth 5 for scrap. Jed shrugged. 60 then. The auctioneer's eyes glittered. Do I hear 70? No one answered. The scaled trader muttered. Let him waste his coins. Humans always love trash. The gavel slammed. Sold to the human mechanic. 5 hulls as is, no returns, no complaints. Transporting the ships to his workshop was a job in itself. He had to rent old tug drones, each one groaning as it hauled the relics across orbit. Other buyers pointed and laughed as the fleet drifted past. Look at him, they said. Dragging home coffins? The old human must have lost his mind. Jed ignored them. His mind wasn't on their words. It was on the ship's. He guided the hulks into docking clamps around his workshop, a patched-together station orbiting a small mining colony. The workshop was barely big enough for one hull, but Jed had no shortage of patience. He tethered the others outside, their broken frames glinting faintly against the starfield. Then he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The first ship he tackled was the least damaged of the 5. Its hull bore deep burns, but the frame was intact. Crawling inside through a broken hatch, Jed entered a cockpit layered in dust. Panels were cracked, wires dangled like vines, and the main console was dark. He pulled out his lamp and toolbox. Hours slipped away as he pried open access ports, brushed away grime, and tested circuits. Most were dead, but not all. He found energy pathways that still carried a trickle of dormant power. He found an engine core that, though cold, had not collapsed, and he found something else, an interface unlike any he had seen. Instead of the standard alien designs he was used to, overcomplicated arrays of symbols, this was simple, almost intuitive. Buttons arranged in clean rows, levers shaped for hands, not claws or tendrils, as if the builders had expected humans, or something very much like them, to use these ships. Jed's pulse quickened. He spent the night tracing lines, patching broken conduits with spare parts from his workshop. He replaced fuses, rewired circuits, and coaxed the reactor with the patience of a man who had done this his entire life. At dawn, as the colony's sun lit the station's hull, Jed slid into the pilot's chair. He took a deep breath, pressed a sequence of buttons, and pulled the main lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the reactor stirred. Lights flickered across the console. A gentle vibration ran through the ship's frame. One by one, the panels came alive, glowing with strange but readable symbols. The ship was waking. Jed laughed out loud, his voice echoing in the empty cockpit. He slapped the console like it was an old friend. Knew you weren't done yet. Just needed someone who believed in you. He climbed out hours later, exhausted but grinning. The ship hovered faintly in its clamps as if eager to stretch its wings. Jed leaned against the hull, wiping grease from his face. He could already imagine the look on those aliens' faces if they knew. The ships weren't coffins. They were survivors. And if one could be restored, so could the others. For the first time in years, Jed felt a spark of hope. Maybe he wouldn't have to ride those cursed interdimensional buses ever again. Maybe no one would, because what he had just bought for 60 credits wasn't scrap. It was freedom, and he had 5 of them. The first ship, the one he had spent nights crawling through with his lamp and tools, now floated steady in its clamp, humming like a giant animal ready to move. It wasn't perfect. Half the panels were still missing. Some of the navigation screens were cracked, and the left thruster coughed smoke whenever he pushed it too hard. But compared to the crowded buses he had been trapped in for decades, this was paradise. The cockpit smelled of oil and clean wires, not the stench of unwashed strangers. The seats, though dusty, were wide and firm. The ship had space, real space, for people to stretch their legs, store bags, even walk around a little. For Jed, that alone was a miracle. He sat in the pilot's chair, brushing his hand across the glowing console. "You and me, girl," he muttered to the ship. "Let's see what you've got left." First Flight Jed unhooked the clamps, ran a check, and pressed the ignition. The reactor thrummed, the thrusters flared, and the ship drifted forward, slowly at first, then faster. Jed steered it out into the black, past his workshop, past the tethered hulks waiting for repair. For a moment, fear gnawed at him. What if the reactor failed? What if the ship tore itself apart in the folds of space? What if the auction crowd had been right? What if these really were coffins? He swallowed the fear and pulled the lever. The stars outside blurred, then snapped into long streaks. The ship leapt forward, slicing into the edge of a dimensional corridor. The ride was smooth, almost gentle. No violent shaking, no clanging pipes, none of the endless delays he had suffered on the buses. Jed barked a laugh. "Ha, faster than those tin cans the cartel calls buses. And you don't even complain!" The ship purred back at him, its panels glowing a steady green. He tested a short run, jumping between 2 local gates. What normally took the buses 3 hours of checks and crawling through traffic lanes, his ship cleared in less than 40 minutes. Smooth, quiet, and clean. When he landed back at the colony, Jed knew exactly what he had in his hands. The future. Word spreads. The mining colony where Jed kept his workshop wasn't large. Word traveled fast. Workers saw the old mechanic's strange ship sliding smoothly through the docking lanes, moving with a grace none of the buses could match. Rumors bloomed. That human bought junk at the auction, didn't he? And now it's flying. Flying? You mean working? Impossible. No, I saw it. Landed in Bay 3. Not a bus, not a shuttle. Something new. By the end of the week, miners and traders were knocking at Jed's door. They were tired of waiting in long lines for the cartel buses. They were tired of paying outrageous fees to be crammed in like livestock. They wanted to know if the old human's ship was real, and if he would take passengers. Jed hesitated. He had bought the ships for himself. He wanted freedom, not a business. But as he looked at the eager faces, men and women in dusty clothes, aliens with tired eyes, families holding children, he felt something stir in him. He had been one of them for so long. Maybe it was time to give others a taste of freedom too. All right, he said. I'll take a run to Delta Outpost tomorrow. 20 seats. Bring your credits, cheap fare, but you respect my rules. I don't run a bus. I run a ship. The first passengers, the next day, 20 people squeezed into the ship, their eyes wide as they looked around. They expected rust and smoke. Instead, they found clean air, space to sit comfortably, and a pilot who actually greeted them instead of barking orders. Jed chuckled as a miner stretched his legs out with a groan. Never had this much room on a bus in my life, the man said. Don't get used to it, Jed replied with a grin. I plan to charge you double next time. They laughed, but when the ship launched, the laughter turned to silence. The smooth jump into the dimensional corridor left them gripping their seats in shock. Then cheers filled the cabin. It's faster. No shaking. Bless the stars, I can breathe. By the time Jed landed at Delta Outpost, his passengers were already spreading the word. Trouble brews, it didn't take long for the cartel to notice. Their profits depended on control, and control depended on fear. A lone human mechanic running a single ship shouldn't have mattered, but passengers flocked to him like moths to a flame. His cheap fares and fast runs cut into their routes. Within 2 weeks, Jed received his first warning. A sleek official shuttle docked at his station. 2 alien inspectors stepped out, their robes shimmering with cartel symbols. They looked at Jed's patched coveralls with disdain. You are operating without license, one said. This violates transit regulations. Jed crossed his arms. Funny, didn't see you caring about licenses when you sold me these ships as scrap. Those vessels are not authorized for commercial use. You will cease immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines, seizure, and possible imprisonment. Jed spat into a rag and wiped his hands. Tell your bosses I'm not running a bus. I'm flying my own ship. If folks want to hitch a ride, that's their choice. You want to stop me? You'll have to pry my wrench from my cold hands. The inspectors left, furious, but Jed knew they would be back. Restoring the fleet warnings didn't stop him. Instead, they pushed him harder. He spent every spare hour crawling through the other 4 ships. Each was in worse shape than the first, but Jed had patience. Piece by piece, he patched hulls, replaced conduits, and coaxed dead reactors back to life. Sometimes he cursed, sometimes he laughed, and sometimes he fell asleep in the middle of a crawl space with a wrench still in his hand. But slowly the relics stirred. The second ship roared to life after 3 weeks. The third followed a month later. Each one flew faster and smoother than the buses. Each one gave him more power to resist the cartel. His workshop became a beacon. Colonists volunteered parts, food, even labor just for a chance to ride. Aliens who had mocked him at the auction now whispered about paying double to join his runs. Jed kept fares low, but he had a rule. No one was treated like cargo. Every passenger got respect, space, and dignity. And that, more than speed or cost, won hearts. The cartel strikes back. The cartel wasn't laughing anymore. They sent more inspectors, this time with soldiers in armor. They slapped fines on Jed, blocked his ships from docking at certain stations, and spread rumors that his vessels were unsafe. Jed answered with stubborn defiance. When they blocked a station, he landed in open fields instead. When they raised fines, he paid in spare parts and laughed in their faces. When they called his ships unsafe, he invited passengers to judge for themselves. The more they pushed, the more passengers trusted him. He wasn't just a pilot. He was one of them. A man who hated the buses, who fought back, who gave them freedom for the first time in generations. But the cartel was not done. They had resources, armies, and governments in their pockets. Jed was only one man with a handful of ships. Cliffhanger one evening after a long run, Jed returned to his workshop. He floated through the airlock, humming to himself when he noticed something strange. The first ship, the one he had repaired, was glowing differently. Its panels pulsed with faint blue light, unlike anything he had seen before. Curious, he climbed inside. The console flickered, symbols rearranging into a new pattern. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a small crystal core, humming with energy. A message appeared on the screen in a language he did not recognize, yet somehow he understood it. To those who awaken this fleet, you now hold the keys to freedom. Jed froze, staring at the words. These ships weren't just relics. They were something far bigger, something the cartel had every reason to keep buried. And now, in his hands, humanity's stubborn grease monkey had uncovered their secret. Jed Carter stared at the glowing crystal in the cockpit. The faint blue light pulsed in rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. The message on the console still shone clear. To those who awaken this fleet, you now hold the keys to freedom. For a long moment, Jed said nothing. His grease-stained fingers hovered above the console. He felt his chest tighten with excitement, but also with dread. Freedom was a big word. Too big for an old man who only wanted to stop riding crowded buses. But deep down, Jed knew things had already gone too far to turn back. The cartel wouldn't leave him alone now, and this message, this secret buried in the ships, meant his fight wasn't just about him anymore. He leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath. Well, he muttered, guess I've gone and stirred up more trouble than I planned. A growing legend within weeks, Jed's fleet of restored ships was running steady routes across nearby systems. He kept fares low, schedules tight, and service personal. People loved it. Passengers told stories of smooth rides, friendly treatment, and the old mechanic who still wore dirty coveralls while flying faster than corporate vessels. They called him Captain Carter, though he laughed at the title. He wasn't a captain. He was just a man with a wrench and too much stubbornness to quit. Soon, not only humans but aliens too began lining up. Tall insectoids folded their wings in wonder at the roomy cabins. Scaled traders stretched their tails without hitting walls. Families with children marveled that they could actually sleep on a trip without being crammed shoulder to shoulder. Every satisfied passenger meant fewer customers for the cartel. And the cartel hated that. Sabotage. The first attempt came quietly. One morning, Jed entered his workshop and found the fuel lines to Ship 2 sliced. Whoever had done it knew their work. They had cut clean, hoping the ship would fail mid-flight. Jed crouched low, his lamp shining over the damage. He touched the sharp cut with his calloused thumb and shook his head. Amateurs, he muttered. They don't know a real mechanic can smell sabotage before it bites him. He replaced the line with spares, double-sealed the connection, and added his own traps, tiny alarms wired to scream if anyone touched his ships without permission. The second attempt was bolder. A group of cartel-paid toughs blocked the docking lane at Delta Outpost. They demanded Jed pay protection fees if he wanted to keep flying. Jed stepped out of his ship, rag in hand, wiping grease from his palms. He looked at the thugs, big, armored, and sneering, and gave them a slow grin. "You boys ever hear of a torque wrench?" he asked. They frowned. "What?" Jed raised the heavy tool from his belt. "Hurts worse than a blaster when swung by a man who knows leverage." He didn't have to swing it. The way he held it, steady and sure with the confidence of someone who had fought machines bigger than men, made the thugs back down. They left muttering, but they left. Secrets in the ships as Jed continued to restore the fleet. He found more surprises. Each ship had a hidden compartment, and in each compartment a crystal like the first. Each one glowed with the same blue light, each one pulsed with the same rhythm, and each one carried messages. They weren't military codes or tactical orders. They were instructions, manuals for how to operate, repair, and improve the vessels. Written in a strange language, yet somehow clear to Jed's eyes, as if the builders had expected someone like him to find them one day. These ships weren't built for war, Jed whispered one night, staring at the glowing script. They were built for people, for travelers, for anyone tired of cages. The more he read, the more he understood. The ships weren't just faster, they were designed to link together to form a network. A free, independent web of transport that could outpace any monopoly. It made sense now why the cartel wanted them buried. If people had ships like these, no one would ever need the crowded buses again. Humanity's trick, The cartel grew more desperate. They raised official charges against Jed, claiming he was operating illegal war relics without authorization. They sent patrol ships to block him from entering gates, but Jed had learned tricks over a lifetime of fixing machines no one else could touch. When patrols blocked him, he rerouted through minor gates, slipping past their nets. When stations refused him docking, he set down in open fields where cheering colonists carried supplies to his hatch. When inspectors tried to board, he jammed their scanners with bursts of harmless static, then laughed as they cursed. Passengers adored him more for it. Only a human, they said, would fight a galactic cartel with duct tape, stubbornness, and bad jokes. And Jed didn't mind. He didn't care for fame, but he cared for the look in people's eyes when they stepped off his ship smiling instead of groaning. The cartel's counterattack, of course. The cartel didn't rely only on inspectors and thugs. They had their own fleets, their own engineers. One day, as Jed flew Ship 1 on a routine run, alarms flared. A cartel interceptor had locked on, demanding he surrender. Passengers panicked. "They'll board us," cried a traitor. "They'll seize the ship." Jed's hands flew over the console. "Hold tight. Let's see if this old girl still has a few tricks left." He pulled the lever hard. The ship surged forward, thrusters roaring. The interceptor followed, its engines newer and stronger. For a moment, it looked like Jed was trapped. Then the console flickered and the hidden systems revealed themselves. The ship's panels glowed brighter, the crystal core pulsing fast. A new control lit up, one Jed had never touched before. He pressed it without hesitation. The ship blurred, folding through space in a way Jed had never felt. The stars stretched, twisted, and snapped back. 1 second they were caught, the next they were free, the interceptor far behind, lost in empty space. The passengers cheered, some hugging Jed, others crying in relief. Jed leaned back, sweat dripping from his brow, and whispered to the console, "You just saved us, girl. Guess you've got more fight left than I thought." Jed's dilemma. That night, back in his workshop, Jed sat alone in the cockpit. The crystals glowed softly, their messages swirling across the screens. He realized he wasn't just fixing ships. He was uncovering a plan, one designed long before his time. These vessels had been created as a gift, a rebellion against control. And now he, an old human mechanic, was the one bringing them back to life. It weighed heavy on him. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He just wanted to stop riding buses. But now people looked to him as something more, and the cartel wasn't going to stop until they destroyed him or the ships. Cliffhanger, the next morning, alarms screamed through Jed's workshop. He ran to the viewport, heart pounding. In the distance, cutting through the stars, came not one but a whole squadron of cartel warships. Sleek, black, bristling with weapons, they moved in formation, surrounding his little station. Jed swallowed hard. His 5 ships floated outside, only 3 fully repaired, the others still half broken. He knew he couldn't outfight a squadron. But as the crystals glowed brighter, filling the cockpits with light, Jed felt the hum of power run through the fleet. It was as if the ships themselves were waiting, ready to show him one last secret. He tightened his grip on the console and whispered, "All right then. Let's show them what humanity can do with junk they threw away." The cartel's fleet closed in. Jed's ships pulsed with hidden energy, and the galaxy held its breath. Jed Carter tightened his grip on the console, the blue crystal pulsing in rhythm with the hum of the ship. Outside, the cartel's black fleet advanced, each vessel bristling with weapons and scanning systems designed to crush resistance. For a moment, Jed felt the old familiar fear, like the days of crowded buses waiting for the next delay, the next insult, the next unavoidable disaster. But then he looked at the other ships. 3 of his 5 vessels were fully repaired and hovering in formation around the workshop. The other 2 were not ready for combat, but they were intact, and that was enough. For the first time in decades, Jed felt the surge of human stubbornness he had relied on all his life. "All right, girl," he muttered to the cockpit. "Let's see what we're really made of." Rallying the people, the news of Jed's defiance spread faster than the fastest dimensional gate. Colonists on nearby planets and stations had already begun to rally, offering supplies, fuel, and even volunteers to help repair the fleet. Humans were not the only ones joining. Some aliens, tired of the cartel's greed and bullying, quietly slipped parts and information to Jed under the cover of night. By midday, dozens of small freighters, miners' ships, and transport pods were secretly aligned behind the outer edges of the cartel's blockade. Jed had not asked for this. He had not wanted a fight, but the people wanted freedom, and somehow, his stubborn human determination had become their symbol. Jed tapped a sequence on the console. The ships responded immediately. Each one hummed and shivered as though alive. He realized the crystals were not just guides, they were activators. The fleet was designed to operate together as a network, a synchronized force with unimaginable efficiency. "Looks like it's showtime," Jed said with a grin. The cartel attacks. The cartel opened fire. Energy beams and plasma bolts streaked through space, lighting the void with deadly precision. Jed's passengers inside the ships ducked instinctively, holding onto handrails. Outside, the other vessels supporting them dodged and weaved, but many were too small to withstand the volleys. Jed's first instinct was to retreat. But then he remembered the instructions hidden in the crystals. The ships were built for more than speed. They were built for survival, for freedom. And humans. Humans were excellent at improvisation. He pressed another sequence on the console. The ship's panel shifted, unlocking hidden thrusters and defensive shields. The vessel lunged sideways, avoiding an incoming blast. The other ships followed suit, moving in a coordinated pattern Jed had never imagined he could control, but somehow did. The cartel's ships fired again, aiming to scatter the fleet. But their attacks only activated more of the hidden systems. The crystals pulsed with energy, forming a protective barrier around Jed's ships. It was subtle, invisible to the naked eye, but it absorbed or deflected nearly every attack. "Not bad for a bunch of old junk," Jed muttered, laughing, outnumbered, not outmatched, despite their technical advantages. Jed knew he couldn't win through firepower alone. The cartel outnumbered him. Each of their vessels was larger, armed, and faster in a straight run. But Jed had something they didn't: human intuition, creativity, and unpredictability. He guided the fleet in tight formations, weaving through the Black Fleet, leading the cartel into a series of navigational traps he remembered from his work with old mining drones. He used narrow asteroid fields, debris clouds, and gravitational anomalies to his advantage. Cartel ships collided, stalled, or misfired. Even the smallest of Jed's patched-up vessels, ones the cartel had dismissed as junk, turned out to have hidden defensive systems and enhanced jump engines. They zipped between patrols like fish in water, confounding the enemy. The people who had rallied in support watched from their stations, cheering. For the first time, they realized the power of an unexpected underdog: humans, and one stubborn old mechanic against a massive monopoly. Discovering the true purpose as the battle raged, Jed's curiosity pulled him back to the glowing crystals. He studied the panels, the messages, the patterns. Each ship was part of a larger network. The original builders had intended these vessels to create a free, galaxy-wide transit system, a network that could move people quickly, safely, and affordably, bypassing monopolies entirely. The cartel never wanted anyone to have this, Jed whispered, awe in his voice. They buried freedom in junk and hoped we'd never find it. He realized that the fleet's power wasn't just defensive. If he could restore the other two ships fully, the network could expand instantly. People would no longer need crowded buses. The galaxy could be free, and Jed Carter was the one holding the key. The final move. The cartel's flagship tried to corner Jed's lead ship. Its weapons charged, energy crackling. The passengers braced themselves for impact. Jed took a deep breath and pressed the sequence he had discovered only moments ago. The crystal pulsed violently and the fleet responded. Hidden energy cores in each ship ignited in harmony. Blue fields of energy surrounded them, forming a lattice of force that bent the path of incoming attacks. Then, without warning, the fleet jumped as one, folding through spacetime in perfect unison. They reappeared behind the cartel's flagship. The sudden maneuver stunned the enemy. Jed leaned over the console, hands steady, eyes sharp. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "you need to outthink, not outfight." He pressed another lever. The flagship systems began to glitch. The hidden fields interfered with its navigation and weapons. It spun helplessly, trapped in a web of Jed's making. One by one, the other cartel ships began to scatter, unsure of what had just happened. By mid-battle, it was clear: the cartel was losing. Their numbers couldn't match Jed's ingenuity combined with the hidden capabilities of the fleet. Humanity prevails. After hours of maneuvering, the cartel's ships retreated. The fleet remained intact, though some ships bore scratches and minor damage. Jed looked out of the cockpit at his passengers, all cheering, laughing, and even crying. He laughed too, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not bad for an old human mechanic," he muttered. News of the battle spread across the nearby systems. People hailed Jed as a hero, not for his fighting skills, but for what he had achieved. A demonstration that freedom could exist even against overwhelming control. Even some aliens who had previously trusted the cartel began approaching Jed, asking to join his fleet to operate routes, to help expand the network. Jed shook his head, smiling. "I didn't start this to be famous. I just wanted to stop riding those cramped buses." But now the galaxy had noticed, and they were watching. Restoring the full fleet, Jed turned his attention back to the remaining 2 ships. With the support of volunteers, spare parts, and new allies, the last 2 vessels were repaired. Each one pulsed with the same blue crystal energy, unlocking faster jumps, stronger shields, and greater capacity. When the fleet finally assembled in orbit around the colony, it was a sight to behold. 5 ships restored from what everyone had called junk, floating together like a small constellation. The hum of their reactors was harmonious, almost musical. Jed climbed into the lead ship's cockpit, looking at the others. He realized that his role was no longer just mechanic. He was a coordinator, a guardian of this unexpected fleet, a human at the center of something larger than himself. And humans, it seemed, had a way of turning what others discarded into power. A new era. The cartel was defeated but not destroyed. Jed didn't want to crush them. He wanted to give people a choice. And now they had one. Colonists, traders, and travelers flocked to the fleet. The interdimensional buses were no longer the only option. People traveled safely, comfortably, and freely. The crystal messages continued to guide Jed, revealing new possibilities. The network could expand beyond the local systems. The ships could carry cargo, medicine, and even emergency relief to worlds cut off by natural disasters. Jed smiled at the thought. He had started this because he hated crowded buses. Now, he realized, he had started something much bigger. Closing one evening after the fleet had returned from a routine run, Jed sat in his cockpit alone. The sun of the mining colony glinted off the hulls of his ships. He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned back in his chair. "Not bad," he whispered. "Not bad at all." The ships hummed softly around him as if agreeing. The blue crystals pulsed steady and calm. Jed closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the passengers he had carried, the freedom he had helped restore, and the stubborn human spirit that had brought it all together. He didn't need fame. He didn't need wealth. He had done what humans always did, taken the impossible, fixed it, and made it better. And for the first time in his life, Jed Carter didn't have to ride a crowded bus ever again. The galaxy, he realized, was finally riding with him.